Hello, I'm Susan Regan, host of Connecticut Valley Views. And today my guest is Peter Wolfgang, who has been the executive director of the Family Institute of Connecticut since 2015. He graduated from the University of Connecticut School of Law after receiving his undergraduate degree from American University in Washington, D.C. He lives with his wife, Leslie, and children in Waterbury, Connecticut. Our discussion today will focus on a proposed bill initiated by the Family Institute, and it is Let's Parent Parent, and its summary and its goals. So Peter, just to provide some insight into this proposed bill, please give us the history and the objectives of it, of the Family Institute, and how it became established.
Sure, Susan. First of all, thank you so much for having me on your program. It's great to be on. I'm a lifelong resident of the state of Connecticut. I grew up in Manchester outside of Hartford, but I did live in West Hartford for most of the 90s and did a lot of stuff in the Valley. So it's great to have my voice heard in the Valley. Thank you very much.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Delighted.
Thank you. Yeah, so let's start with the Family Institute of Connecticut itself, as you asked. The Family Institute of Connecticut was founded in 1989. So we've been around for, almost 35 years now. We are a pro-life, pro-family, traditional values organization. I don't know if any of your viewers may have ever heard of Dr. James Dobson or Focus on the Family. That was an organization that was created out west in Colorado in the 1970s. Dr. James Dobson was a child psychologist. He was also a minister with the Church of the Nazarene. And already by the 1970s, he was very concerned about the unraveling of family life, of marriage and family in the United States. This is sort of like after the age of free love, the age of Aquarius and all that. And in the 1970s, we saw the divorce rate start to skyrocket in this country. And Dr. Dobson wanted to do something about it. So he founded Focus on the Family. And by about the end of the 1980s, Focus on the Family realized that a lot of these battles for marriage as against divorce, for the right to life of the innocent unborn child, that was another fight that Focus took on, that a lot of these battles were going to be won or lost at the state level in the various state capitals. So they encouraged the formation of what are called Family Policy Councils, FPCs. And so that's what we are. We are a state-based family council, family policy council. FPCs are in about 40 of the 50 states. We're all independent and autonomous, responsible for raising our own funds, but we're networked in together with Focus on the Family. That's sort of like the mothership. And as I said, so the Family Institute of Connecticut, we're sort of like the local affiliate for Focus on the Family. And we are what the media would call the social conservatives. You've heard of, certainly in Connecticut, you've heard of fiscal conservatives. You've heard of people who want lower taxes, smaller government. And of course, we're on board with that as well. But our main focus are the social issues. We want an environment, a state of Connecticut where God is honored, families flourish, unborn life is protected. What we want, as I said, I'm a lifelong resident of this state. I go back several generations in the town of Manchester, where I'm initially from. We want a Connecticut that would be a blessing and not a curse to our children, our grandchildren, and generations yet unborn, yet born. So the Family Institute of Connecticut has been around that long. I got involved in the 2000s, in the 21st century. I met my wife. You mentioned in your intro that I went to UConn Law School, and that is where I met my wife. And at the time, she and I were both going through our own sort of, each of us, our own sort of conversions to a more in my case, she was an atheist and she became Catholic. In my case, I was moving from a sort of a liberal politics and theology towards more orthodoxy and conservatism. And we came out of that, out of our experience at UConn Law School, wanting to do something for families in the United States. And originally, I wanted to go down to Washington and work at the Family Research Council. And I didn't realize that we had kind of a local version of that in Connecticut. I read an article about the Family Institute in the Hartford Courant in the early 2000s. I reached out to my predecessor who was running the organization before me, and he and I connected. We worked together in the early 2000s against the redefinition of marriage. I organized a petition drive that gathered about 100,000 signatures in the churches. It's hard to believe this now, 20 plus years later in Connecticut, but even in deep blue liberal Connecticut, most people did not want marriage to be redefined. And we had rallies of literally thousands of people at the state capitol. We had some of the biggest rallies in Connecticut history at that time. And because of that, same-sex marriage never did come to Connecticut through the democratic process. We stopped it every year for a decade. Unfortunately, they then went to the courts, as eventually happened on the federal level a few years prior here in Connecticut. They got the courts to simply impose a redefinition of marriage on the state of Connecticut. So we went back to the legislature. We secured some of the strongest religious liberty protections against it in the whole country, which is why you haven't heard of some of the clashes between religious liberty and this new definition of marriage in Connecticut that have occurred in other parts of the country. It's like the best kept secret in Connecticut. It's one of the biggest victories we ever won. And we went on to fight more battles on religious liberty. And then in the early 2010s, early to mid 2010s, the assisted suicide issue arrived in the state of Connecticut, and we're pro-life. And of course, as I said, we're social conservative, but we formed an alliance with left-leaning, self-identifying progressive disability rights activists against assisted suicide. That's something we've done very successfully. I took over the Family Institute from the guy I mentioned in 2007. I've been running it for about 16 years. And one of the hallmarks of my time as head of FIC is these alliances that we've been able to form because we are behind enemy lines here in Connecticut. It's a very liberal state. We understand that. We've been able to form really amazing coalitions with people who may not agree with us on anything else, but agree with us on whatever the one issue is we happen to be working on. So we have left-leaning allies on the assisted suicide fight. We defended the pregnancy centers for many years against legal attacks on them. And then as we enter the 2020s now, the third decade of the 21st century, we come to the issue that we're here to talk about today. I'll tell you, Susan, I could not have imagined when I was up at the state capitol 20 years ago, my predecessor and I, speaking against same-sex marriage, against a redefinition of marriage, that we would be where we are now. I mean, what we told them at the time was, well, if two men can get married, why not three men? Like, it didn't seem to us that there was any logical stopping point. But even us, it did not occur to us. It would not have occurred to me 20 years ago to say, look, if you have same-sex marriage someday, then transgenderism is right around the corner after that. You're going to see an erosion of parental rights. Someday you'll have drag queen story hour for toddlers in the public libraries. And you're going to have public schools secretly transing kids from one sex to another and deceiving parents about it. But that's where we are.
Yeah. So you were then the forecaster of that. Yeah. And so then would you consider, given what you have just said, would you consider Connecticut? You said you felt that you were front runners when it came to so many of the things, and you were able to maintain what you believe to be the right focus on the family. Would you call Connecticut a leadership state?
Oh, yeah, I think so, in ways both good and bad. Connecticut is, we're like a petri dish for the cultural left, for cultural Marxists, frankly, on the national level. They cook up these ideas. Connecticut is like their lab experiment. They cook up these crazy ideas and they bring them to Connecticut first to see if it will fly. In the case of same-sex marriage, for instance, the goal was not simply to pass same-sex marriage in Connecticut, but to pass it through the legislature. Some places like Massachusetts and California had already imposed same-sex marriage through their courts. What the other side thought they could do in Connecticut was make it the first state to do it through the democratic branches of government. And we held them off for a decade. And we kept Connecticut out of the history books, but that was their real goal. That's what they were trying to achieve in the state of Connecticut, and we stopped them. Now, to give two other examples for how Connecticut is a petri dish, the transgender issue. So transgenderism, transgender special rights, that actually first came to Connecticut in 2011 under Governor Malloy. At the time, we called it the bathroom bill. In Family Institute of Connecticut, we were the only group to stand against it. We fell just a few votes short of gutting that bill. But it was FIC alone against Governor Malloy. And because we fell a few votes short, Susan, because we failed to stop that bill, that agenda then spread like wildfire through the whole country. Whereas, on the other hand, assisted suicide, we have defeated that thing for a decade. And as a result, it hasn't spread like wildfire. There's about 10 states that do have assisted suicide, but it is an amazing fact that it really hasn't spread to the rest of the country. And the way this works is they try their ideas in Connecticut, and if it passes in Connecticut, then it's on to the rest of the country. Whereas if we stop it in Connecticut, what they say is, wow, if we can't even do this in Connecticut, it's never going to fly in the South or the Midwest. So in a way, Connecticut really is like the gateway to the rest of the country. If you stop bad things in Connecticut, you're protecting the rest of the country. If you fail to stop bad things in Connecticut, then unfortunately it's open season on the rest of the country. That's what we've seen repeatedly.
Sure.
And that, go ahead.
Please, go ahead.
Well, and then that brings us to the bill that we're here to discuss today, the Let Parents Parent bill.
When did that start, actually?
Sorry?
When did that start? What year, what time frame did you say it's time for us to introduce a bill like this? A year?
Well, ideally, we probably should have done it immediately after the transgender bill passed in 2011. But like I said, as with same-sex marriage, so with transgenderism. Who would have thought that after Governor Malloy's transgender special rights law, the bathroom bill, that someday we'd have a case where, not several cases, that it would be systemic, that public schools would be trying to transition kids from one sex to another and deceiving parents. I mean, if this doesn't violate some of the basic norms of our entire nation, nothing does. But here you and I are now talking at the tail end of 2023. It's December of 2023. The next legislative session starts in February of 2024. And I would say right now, Susan, right now is when people should be calling their state legislators and say, listen, I know the session is still a couple months off, but I've gone to the website. The website is, well, the Family Institute's website is ctfamily.org. But the website you want to go to for this bill, it's called letparentsparentct.org. CT is in Connecticut. People need to go to letparentsparentct.org and see this bill. The bill's already been written. All the information is already there. Read up on this bill. I encourage every single state resident, every voter of the state of Connecticut to read up on this bill and then politely and professionally contact your state legislator and be like, look, I don't know, I may agree or disagree with your politics on everything else. I may be a social conservative. You may be a social liberal. You may be into the LGBT agenda or what have you. But what we're talking about here is parental rights. And by the way, Susan, not just on gender transition. I lead with that because that's the issue that's much in the press. And that is one of the issues that we address here. But really across the board, whether it's suicide ideation, whether it's bullying, whether it's poor academic performance, whether your kids have been harmed, injured in some way, there needs to be more communication between parents and students. And that's what we're concerned about here, that in general, the schools, I mean, most famously in the matter of schools secretly transing kids against their parents' wishes or even their knowledge, but across a wide range of things, the schools are not working with the parents. They're not making the parents aware of what's going on with their kids. And that is the point of the Let Parents Parent bill. There's about 5 different reasons why this bill is necessary. One is, we should talk about 2 about like what's going on in the state of Connecticut that we would even propose this bill. And in that regard, we should start with Attorney General Tong.
Okay, let me just ask a question right here. Has this all been progressing with people just within the Family Institute, or have you done what you would call in marketing focus groups with parents? Have you included people from the outside to get a general feel for whether this would be, as far as the public is concerned, what they would want?
We have it in an informal sense. There's nothing so formal as what you described, but we have been networking. We have been speaking with a wide variety of people for a couple years now. This wasn't something we just came up with overnight. This is something that's been building for a while. The reason why we introduced the bill now is that we've hit kind of a critical point. But there are groups. I mean, Family Institute, like I said, we've been doing this. I'm sitting here right now in my office in Hartford. I've been lobbying at the state capitol, which I can see the gold dome right outside my window. We've been doing this for many years. But we're talking about, this is sort of an organic, grassroots, bottom-up effort where you have these parental groups that are just rising up on their own in different communities across the state of Connecticut. You can see that the elite establishments are starting to fret over this. There was an article in Hearst Media just today about there was some sort of forum at the state capitol the other day with librarians in the state of Connecticut. They're very upset that they're being challenged. And, Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz was at this meeting, and some of the more liberal state legislators, that how dare they challenge these librarians over this gay porn that's in the public school libraries that's aimed at very small children. Well, why are they being challenged, Susan? Because you have these Moms for Liberty groups on the state level and other parental groups that go by different names, many of whom, by the way, don't necessarily agree with all the politics of the Family Institute. Some of these are adults who are themselves maybe pro-abortion rights, pro-LGBT, which the Family Institute, we take conservative positions on all these issues. But what we unite with these folks on is keep the kids out of it. Like, even if these are families whose values may not be the same as mine, they want to be the ones to have these conversations with their children. It's not the role of the schools to do this. Now, why are we having this discussion? Why are these groups upset? Why is the Family Institute proposing this bill? Well, begin with Attorney General Tong. There is a case called Foote versus Ludlow. A Connecticut mom, she sends her kids just over the border to a school in Massachusetts. She's suing that school because the school was secretly transitioning two of her children from one sex to the other and deceiving her about it. They weren't letting her know about it. Attorney General Tong filed a friend of the court brief in that case on the side of the schools. He took a position in favor of the schools deceiving parents about the gender transition of their kids. This means keeping it a secret from the parents that they're calling the kids by other pronouns and things like that.
Well, Peter,
this is why we need the bill.
Yes, well, there's a quote from Thomas Jefferson, and it says the government states, the government, if it is powerful enough and rich enough to give you everything, then it is strong enough to take everything away, which is obviously what they're doing here. Now, the other thing you have on your side is that you have individuals such as Christine Rebstock, who is actually a person who came out at age 50 plus, I think around 53. And she had her various feelings about herself, her health, her mental attitude, and she transgendered from a man to a woman. We know her quite well. And she's very conservative, and she is entirely against all of these pill blockers. So now what you have is a result of what happened to her many years ago. She followed some of the things, took the pill blockers, and now has various health issues for it. And obviously, she is not backing anything to do with taking this authority away from parents.
Yeah, well, and like I said, as far back as assisted suicide and even earlier, we form coalitions all the time with people we may not necessarily agree with on everything. And Christine Rebstock, he's been fantastic on this issue. Very grateful for Christine's support on this. And these are the sort of people that the legislature needs to hear from. These are people who may not necessarily agree with us on everything, but they have firsthand experiences, as you just laid out, Susan, about why this is bad. So we're grateful to his support. It's very similar in some ways to our fight against assisted suicide, where the disability rights people, they're the ones that can go right up to the state capitol and say, look, I'm afraid if you pass assisted suicide, I'm the one who will be targeted. Like, this law will say the right to die will become a duty to die. Gee, you're costing us a lot of money. Wouldn't this be easier? And Christine, when you're coming back to let parents parent, Christine can speak to this better than just about anyone because of the things that Christine has been through. Christine wrote an op-ed for Connecticut Mirror. I encourage everyone to go to CT Mirror and scroll down their Connecticut Views section and read Christine's op-ed because it's very good. And Christine laid out everything about why this bill is necessary. Attorney General Tong is part of this. Also, the Connecticut Department of Education, they're putting out recommendations and guidances to the school districts in the state of Connecticut that you should hide this stuff from the parents, that if the parent objects, well, it's the parent then that needs counseling. These are recommendations. They don't have the force of law, but a lot of school districts actually treat it as if it's a mandate from the state, even when it isn't, which is another reason why we need the Let Parents Parent law. I think that's very important. And also, I mean, what is the executive branch doing issuing this? Like, the place where we ought to be having this discussion, Susan, is in the legislature. That's where the people get their say. There ought to be public hearings, and we all ought to go up to the state capitol. You quoted Thomas Jefferson. Another one that I would quote, the U.S. Supreme Court 100 years ago in Pierce versus Society of Sisters. This was the decision in 1925 that said it is okay to have a private school system if you want to. They said children are not mere creatures of the state. And Susan, again, it blows my mind because I'm a man in my 50s. I've been doing this now for 20 years, that we have reached this point where I'm sitting here with you having to explain to the people of Connecticut that parents have the right to parent their children, that we actually need a law to that effect, that we have a government that says, no, your children belong to us now. And I think you're right that we've been the canary in the coal mine. Like, we've been warning all along. And in some ways, it went past what even we could have predicted. But we've been warning all along that it would come to something like this eventually, where now children are treated as if they are mere creatures of the state. And that's what we have to fight against. So, whether, just as we don't necessarily agree with with our allies on suicide, on everything, we're very grateful to have Christine's support. And these are the voices. If you don't want to hear it from me because you can put me in that box, well, he's, Wolfgang's a social conservative, he's a religious nut, whatever. Listen to people like Christine. Listen to people who are outside the traditional religious versus secular, pro-life versus pro-choice, whatever box you want to put some of us in. Listen to how broad the opposition is to this. This is the conversation we need to have.
Yes, well, there is the other point of fact as well, and that is that all of this indoctrination that's going on is taking up, academic time in school, where the students, so there's a bit of hypocrisy as well, because they say, we know better, the Board of Education, in each of the towns, we know better, this is the right way to go. Then they fall back on, the administration with Tong, with regard to, we have to follow the mandates that they're setting and the priorities they're setting. So they say that the children, as young as 3 or 5 or 6 or 7, have the opportunity and have the right and have the voice to actually say they want to change their gender. But then they fall back on, it's our directive to have them change their gender if they're so inclined. It's so dangerous to take this away from parents. At the same time, they're asking parents to support the child. Now, you can get into the timeline too. If this child is actually going to, and they're going to have a transition and have an operation or start taking pills, wouldn't you think that parents would catch on to the fact that you're going to be gone for the day because, and then the child says, I'm going for an operation, or I'm going to speak to a psychologist or whatever. So this is a very dangerous path. And more than that, we are formulating the future leaders of not only our state, but the country.
Well, that's exactly right. And look, these parents, they pay taxes to support these schools. They're the ones paying the taxes. These schools, they live off the tax revenue of these parents. So to condescend to these parents and act like they're the boss of the parents and the children, it's really outrageous. To your point about the schools and the time that's being wasted on this sort of thing, no one is better on this than the retired editor of the Journal Inquirer, Chris Powell, who still has a column and has written about this repeatedly about, look, I mean, our schools, particularly in the inner cities in Connecticut, places like New Haven, where this agenda is full court press, our schools are failing. They're not teaching the kids the basics. And this is what you want to spend your time on. It's really upside down for our society. And when you think of all the rising threats that we face in America, domestically and abroad, we're headed deeper. We're about the quarter point now of the 21st century. And we really can't afford to do this to ourselves with the challenges that we're going to face in the years ahead. We really need to be a strong people.
Yes. Well, tell me, Peter, what is your feeling with regard to if you can pass this in the first session of the legislature in 2024? I mean, you've spoken to, and do you feel you have on board enough legislators that you might be able to pass it? Or what is it, a 50-50 chance? And what will you do following that if in fact it doesn't?
Yeah, so I mean, I would put it at 50-50 at this point because we're still trying to line up votes. The first step would just to be, I mean, anyone can propose a bill. The first step would be to actually get the public hearing. If we could do that, I think that would be an accomplishment. I mean, we're swinging for the fences, so who knows? I think this issue is ripe, and sometimes when an issue is ripe, you got to strike. That's the moment. You got to strike while the iron's hot. So, I mean, anything's possible. I think this issue is ripe. I think a lot of people are very upset. It's an election year. I think the legislators will be feeling the heat of the voters on this, on the parents.
I agree.
On the other hand, you know, our legislature is also heavily gerrymandered and has some protection, frankly, from the will of the people. It's why they can get away with doing some of the stuff they did. On the other side, we've crushed assisted suicide for 10 years in a row, and they don't care. They just keep bringing the bill back for a public hearing every year. So, I mean, we can do that too. If we do get a public hearing and it doesn't pass, you know, we still will have made progress, and we'll keep coming back every year. As long as this remains a problem, we'll keep coming back every year and try to pass this bill.
Okay. Well, given that, with regard, I think that the legislators and various representatives are going to feel the heat from their constituents. So they are caught in the crossfire of, you know, will I get reelected and so forth, and will I remain popular with my constituents and so forth. So they're going to be watching carefully. So I think you're right. You get out your designated batter and put it out of the ballpark. Now, I know you did mention the two websites you can go to. One would be for the Family Institute, and one would be to follow the process of this bill. So if you could give those two again.
Sure. I strongly encourage everyone to go to the Family Institute of Connecticut's website. It is ctfamily.org. Again, that is ctfamily.org. Sign up for our email alerts, and you'll know right away. You'll know everything that's happening. And then as well about this bill, go to letparentsparentsct.org.
Great. Well, Peter, it's been a great pleasure to talk with you. We certainly hope that our viewers will watch the segment. We are now airing in over 100 towns now and adding every day. And the segments for this particular one is on ctvalleyviews.com. And you can see all of our shows there. And please, viewers, send in your comments through that website to us. And we really appreciate your time, Peter.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.